Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we hang out, we talk about games, we talk about board games, role playing games, card games, things that inspire us, things that are beautiful, things that make us joyful. And that's why we're here today. We are talking about games, and sometimes bad things happen to good characters. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, I was running the kids' game here. I run a kids game up at one of our local game stores every other week ish, and we're playing Tales of the Valiant, which, by the way, is a fantastic game. If you are looking for something 5e adjacent and you want something that's got great design and a little bit more balanced look at the game, check out Tales of the Valiant. Kobold Press knocked this out of the park and love running it. So let me say good morning to everybody. Tink and Grom and Padre and Bob Crumb. Toucan Crumb. I was actually going to give you a call after this, Bob. I got the last little bit of the core Amboria AD done, so I wanted to chat with you about that. So, that's after this. And one of the kids' characters died in this game. On Sunday. Now, sometimes I've been accused of being a killer DM, and that's not true. I roll my dice out in the open, and so the dice fall where they may. And in this particular case, this kid's wizard decided that the best way to kill a frost giant was to climb up the frost giant, into the frost giant's mouth, down the frost giant's gullet, cast grease, and then burning hands. And I gave, this took multiple turns, and for the first 3 turns, I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? Have you thought this through? This doesn't seem like a great idea. Climbing into the giant's mouth is basically just him eating you. And so his character perished. And this kid handled it well. He was like, well, I guess I'm dead. And the group decided they want to go on a quest next time to resurrect him, and so I'm going to make a side character for him to play. But it happens. If you play a role-playing game long enough, death happens. And we're going to talk about kind of how death happens, and then how modern games kind of look at it. So death happens in a lot of different ways. Sometimes your player does something suboptimal or ill-advised, as I believe is what Bob is trying to say in the chat. Sometimes the dice are not in your favor. An encounter that should have been super easy. I'm thinking back to one of my TPKs. It was a goblin ambush, and the group outnumbered them and they outclassed them, and it was a random encounter. Heroes couldn't roll to save their lives, and the goblins killed like 3 of the players' characters. Sometimes, like in my 13th Age game, it's a total party kill. Because the group ignored the writing on the wall and decided not to run away when they had the chance. One by one, like dominoes, they fall to the ground dead. But notice I didn't, in any of those cases, say that sometimes death happens because the GM is angry with you and decides to kill your character. That happens. That does not happen at my table, and it should not happen at yours. Death should be a result of agency. If you have the freedom to make choices in the game, those choices only have meaning if they have consequences, both good and bad. If you get to the end of your campaign and you got everything you wanted exactly the way you wanted it, then you really didn't have any agency. You just had a fairy godmother giving you everything you wanted and kind of telling you a story as you kind of jump along the way. My friend Brad likes to say it's not an adventure until someone's character dies. Up until then, it's just an outing. And Tink, that would be the agency that I let you lean into, and you are fantastically role-playing your character's faults is what caused the death of the group. Now, some people don't like this. And I would actually say the modern gaming trend has moved away from this. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's very hard to kill your character or for your character to die. In order to die, you have to drop to 0, remain at 0 for multiple turns, and fail to roll higher than... you have a 55% chance every time you throw the dice of making a death save. It requires a concerted effort on the part of the GM to down a 5th edition character. Now, sometimes there are, to quote Matt Colville, sometimes the Earth Elemental stops on your head. Sometimes there are creatures who are that vicious, or villains who do not want to see the heroes get up again. There are other games that say, or game philosophies, and I've seen this repeated ad nauseum for the last couple of years, that a GM should never allow character death unless the player themselves either asks for it or allows it. And I think that's dumb. I think we are playing a game of adventure and heroism, doesn't matter what version of the game that you're playing, and that adventure or heroism has costs and has chances of failure. And I think that player death is the clearest sign that your players have real agency in the game. They have a real chance to affect the world and make a change, because the world can affect them and make their changes. So, here's the thing. If you're a GM or a player who wants to play in a game where your character can never die, and I had plenty of people at my table take umbrage with the fact that death is an ever-constant companion at my table, that's fine. Play the game the way you enjoy playing the game. But also let me put out there that maybe the reason you have a hard time getting players to invest in the game, you have a hard time getting investment in the game overall, the fact that your game might burn out, is because there is no risk involved in your game. A lot of people comment on the fact that of how many, characters die at my table, because let me make this abundantly clear, you should never kill your players. That is murder. You should only allow characters to die at your table. But here's the thing, when death is an ever-present companion, death is the thing that brings focus and clarity and investment to our lives. I speak from personal experience. Nothing sharpens your focus more than a near-death experience. Tink says, how does a game work without consequences to balance rewards? So my buddy Corey played in an Exalted game where it was very clear that the GM was shying. There was no risk of death. And the game collapsed like a flan in the cupboard because the players realized it and constantly pushed more and more absurd ideas and risks on the GM until the GM, in frustration, quit the game rather than allowing the dominoes and the dice to fall where they may. I think it's very difficult to have a game where the consequences and the risks don't balance out the reward. Yes, John Doom, like a flan in the cupboard, much like the Ottoman Empire, just collapsing like a flan in the cupboard. You know where that's from, you can earn a Benny. So, what do we do as GMs? Well, so here's the thing. Some players, especially older players who have played a longer time, or play certain types of games, OSR games, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu, they're used to character death, and they'll probably shrug it off and make a new character and go forward. there are going to be people who are devastated when they lose their first character. Maybe even their second or third. I know that Tink lost her very first character at my table, and it was a rough death. And that's fine. Like, we as GMs should, I don't want to say encourage, that's not the right word, but we should encourage the level of investment in our games that when someone mourns the loss of their character, that we're there to be with them. You're reprogrammed now, Tink, exactly. We should encourage that level of investment and be there for them. If they need time to step away from the table, that's fine. I always like having set aside some time for the characters to do a funeral. That's why I wrote the rules in Jackals, where if the characters give a dead character a funeral, that new character can start with some extra advances. Gives the party time to mourn the loss and move on. I do not think that we should stop the game completely when a character death happens and then pick up next session. I think that's absurd. That's holding a table hostage for one person. There are ways to kind of help mitigate this. One, if it's a TPK, okay, sure, if it's a TPK, that's probably a good time to stop the session and talk with your players. But most of the time, you're going to have one or two character deaths, and in a group of friends, it's easy to say, okay, why don't you guys, let's talk about what happened. Let the living characters kind of eulogize the dead while the dead make up their new characters and find a way to dovetail it in. Some games, like was mentioned in the chat, like DCC, you start with 4 characters because they expect 3 of you to die. And that's something else to keep in mind. It's interesting to me that you can sort of track the survivability rails that are put in a role-playing game for characters. It maps almost always to games that have really in-depth character creation. If you're playing Hyperborea or Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition and before, your character time to make a new character is however long it takes you to roll 3d6 straight down the line, hit dice, hit die or more depending on what level your GM lets you bring back, write down some equipment, write down a couple of special abilities, and you're ready to go. It takes maybe 10 minutes. Rifts characters are a lot more hardy because it takes a lot longer to make a Rifts character. You're picking a race, you're picking an OCC, you're writing down 20 to 30 skills and looking up the bonuses and the base chances and figuring out modifiers and picking spells. Rifts has more rails to keep characters alive. 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition, characters have a lot more to keep track of, and it makes sense. The longer you invest in making a character, the more you are going to feel their death. Now, one of the problems that we sometimes come across as GMs is that if players show up with a massive backstory, their investment versus their playtime in the character is out of whack, especially in games with levels where when your time investment is so low, their health is also, appropriately low. And so if somebody comes with a massive backstory and they have this huge investment and they have 2 hit points and the goblin hits them for 6 and they bleed out and die, they're going to feel suitably, they're going to feel a lot more emotion about that death, which does not feel the same for the rest of the table. Again, I like to say that the real story in the role-playing game is the story that happens from the first session. Backstories are okay, but they sometimes skew that level of investment. Investment in the game should rise over time played, kind of commensurately. So, what do you do if you're playing a game that's got rails, your players are fine with death, and something bad happens. Something bad happens to your favorite character. We're not supposed to have favorite characters. And for all of my players watching, I don't have favorite characters in the group. We all have favorite characters in the group. What happens? What do? Well, you have two options in that moment. You can, as a GM, wave your hand, change the die roll, pull the damage, give them a way out. But I think that is the wrong answer. I think in doing that, you are robbing your players of agency. Player made choices for the character that led them to that situation. And yes, I get it. Sometimes your dice are like my buddy Evan's, and they just continually suck. That's part of the social construct of the game that we're playing. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes good characters die young. And it's sad. And it sucks. But here's the other secret. The character wasn't the source of the good stories. The player at the table was the source of the good stories. They just get to tell another one. So, other kind of things to think about here is the idea of sacrifice. I am also a sucker in games if a player comes to me and says, I want this thing and I'm willing to lay down my character's life for it. Sometimes bad things happen to good characters because the player wants something more than they want their character to stay in the story. And in those cases, I actually codified this as a rule in my Crucible rules. It's a rule that I first encountered in Legend of the Five Rings. If you're willing to sacrifice your character's life, I will bend almost any rule in the book to give you what you want, because I think self-sacrifice for an ideal or a cause or a group or a person is the highest moment of beauty in role-playing games. And I have a buddy who Padre knows, Calvin, who in every game that we play in usually finds that moment and is 100% okay with his character dying, as long as he can get his friends out of this bad situation, or as long as he can achieve this thing. The martyr card in Torg Eternity, Padre, yes. Sometimes, okay, characters lose an arm. Lulcie's a great character. All right, let's see here. Let's scroll back through the comments. The other thing to keep in mind is, if someone dies, to quote Ghostbusters 2, death is but a doorway, time is but a window. Most of our games allow for resurrection. And you know what the cool thing about that is? The players want to resurrect a character. They just came up with their own adventure based off the events of the game. That is a living world, and that is player agency. D6 Star Wars was quick. Savage Worlds and Torg Eternity are quick if you know what you're doing. D&D 3, yeah, Pathfinder 4th edition, they can take a while. So how do I feel about the heroes never die setting rule? So here's the thing. For certain genres, yeah, like cinematic pulp action adventures, you are trying to replicate a genre of story where the hero will never be taken out. And I mean, in that game, it's much like the Nile Empire in Torg, right? No body, no crime. That is basically what we are talking about there. Because in that same thing, the villains never die either. Moriarty always comes back. The body that you found was actually my twin cousin's sister's nephew's doppelganger look-alike, dog walker. And that I love. Yeah, so So Tink, in case you haven't picked up on it this week, we've been joking a lot about characters being disarmed, literally. In our Savage Pathfinder campaign, John Doom. I can't say it that way. I can't say it the way I know you want me to say it, Tink. Tink's character Lulcy walked into a room with Splug, our goblin companion. They set off some traps, and Tink rolled 2 critical failures in a row. Broke her sunrod and lost her arm. The arm loss was based off the fact she took so many wounds and then rolled randomly for the permanent injury, and it was lost. And sometimes, as Tink found out, the best cure for a character dismemberment or death is laughter. Like when a incredibly handsome person playing an incredibly handsome character picks up that arm and uses it as a pointer, or maybe as a back scratcher, or as a weapon. I think that's truly when Tink began to heal from that arm loss. So, yeah, I think I'm just gonna stop reading Tink's comments in the channel. Grob managed to kill a PC twice during a scene. Well done. If you can kill the same character twice, that's pretty slick. So we're here at the end of the show. Tink has learned this great lesson about of the healing power of laughter at the table. And hopefully there's some stuff in there about character death that you can use in your own game. Now, on Tuesday, we'll be back, and I will be doing a review of the latest Call of Cthulhu campaign. I got a review copy in, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. And then I will be off next Thursday. It's my annual 2nd edition D&D TPK weekend. And that'll be a lot of fun. Don't worry, Tink. We'll reprogram you again. So, until next time. Bob gets a Benny for life. That's when you go out on a limb. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I am JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Until then, have a good one.